I need you all to bear with me. Here I go rambling yet again, but I want to be as thorough and coherent as possible, so I am going to take my time here with this video. It's fresh on everybody's mind. Everybody has seen multiple angles of this Ukrainian refugee who was stabbed to death by some idiot, lunatic, dickhead, all of the words and the terms. People have seen now other folks that are standing idle by, kind of just letting it unfold and not doing anything. And now people are voicing frustrations with them as well. But for today's video, I really want to talk about the racial aspect, which is, it's not even an elephant in the room. I think people don't even, it is, let's say, an elephant in the room, but it's not one that people are afraid to address. Not anymore. And there's a lot of discussions being had right now about race. Now, I want to be clear here, and I'm not going to say anything that I haven't already said before. Demographics matter, and I will never knock anybody, no matter how uncomfortable that it may make anyone feel for that matter. I am not going to get bent out of shape for people recognizing any sort of patterns, be it in their own life experiences or with the data that is available to them. Taking that information, digesting it, and then acting accordingly. I don't knock anybody for doing that, and I will never knock anybody for doing that. If, and you see that, whether it be with black people or what have you, and they tend to be low impulse control, and this is what you believe, and could snap, things can get violent very quickly. The data points to the fact that there's a massive overrepresentation of violent conflict, particularly in like homicide and things like that. When you look at it in a proportionality sense of how much, let's say, particularly black men represent of the United States population versus how much they represent as far as the homicides or violent crimes are concerned. Okay. And so if someone takes that information and a way to, or means for self-preservation, especially those of you with families, and you are going somewhere and you're more aware, you see someone that has a skin tone that's similar to mine, and you decide that I'm going to walk on the other side of the street. I'm going to be a lot more aware. I refuse to have my back to them, comparatively speaking to maybe some of the other races. That in that of itself is harmless for them to do that, for as far as the self-preservation aspect of it, and people, again, rather not wanting to be involved in that sort of situation. And that doesn't mean that well, let me say this, whether that be in a more like a broader sense, like where they live, or even in like micro day-to-day, them going to the store, getting on the bus, or whatever it may be. All of that is harmless. That is very much in their right. And what people don't seem to understand about liberty is that it is not some form of self, or no, it's not some form of forced integration. I did a video on this. That's not what liberty is. In fact, that is illiberal in the sense that, like in a classical sense, and it is anti-liberty to try to force people to act a certain way for people that they're not using aggression upon. Now, if those thoughts and those views manifest itself into acts of aggression, like you see black people and then you want to do violence against them and they have done nothing for you because of whatever reason, well, that in that of itself, and it's not the racism that is the problem, it's the violence that would then be the issue. That's something entirely different. But what is harmless is someone saying, look, and other black people may do this as well. Like, look, man, I see these folks over here. I'm not trying to deal with that, so I'm going over there. That is harmless. I know there's been this sort of stigma around this idea where people recognize this sort of stuff and they get demonized for that. I think folks are over that, especially now seeing this in such a blatant aspect. Again, that's why I say demographics matter. And I think it is perfectly rational, whether it be whatever subject matter that it is. And oftentimes it will reveal some uncomfortable truths When you look at even some of the diddlers out there and the representation associated with that, you may come to some harsh conclusions out there. But if people want to act accordingly in a harmless way, in an act of self-preservation, and they decide that I don't want to deal with that, or I'm going to do everything I can to not involve myself and interact with these types of people, that is okay. That is harmless. But I do want to say this. I believe that folks, in just hyper-focusing on the racial aspect, and that alone doesn't resolve this issue. The truth of the matter is this. Your government has failed you. It is made up of crooks, thieves, and some of the most evil pieces of crap that walk the planet. This isn't anything exclusive to America. It is an institution that has a monopoly on territorial monopoly on violence and ultimate decision making, and it attracts the most evil pieces of trash that exist. Okay? And whatever their efforts are, whether it be in the name of social justice or anything else, they have allowed in multiple instances, and this is one of the more obvious issues, where you have someone that has been a proven violent criminal that is out on the streets and being, I believe, arrested 14 freaking times. Your DAs, your judges, all of them have failed that woman, right? And have failed your geographical area. This happens everywhere. For whatever reason, private property rights is put on the back burner. I'm using that in a general sense, right? I was talking a Rob Bart shirt on. So I'm coming from, when I talk about private property rights, I know people like to try to remove the element of private property rights when talking about bodily harm. But if you understand the concept of self-ownership, that's why that is a bad thing. And it's still a violation of private property rights, right? Is and violent bodily invasion, right? So people look at that as something that is like not even necessary these days. It's not something to uphold. It's not something to adhere to, right? And so they've created these, or rather infiltrated all of these, your beloved institutions that people look to as just and righteous. And they look to them, but they have all the power because of that, right? Because they see them as legitimate, okay? And in doing so, you have allowed these corrupt people to set their own rules that don't even make any sort of sense if it is about sort of preserving liberty, which also means maintaining some sort of peace. Not to say it's going to be without violence, not to say that it's going to be without people harming people, like or violating people's private property rights, right? It's the fact that they've allowed that sort of culture to manifest itself. In any event that someone does something bad, your government has given them every single opportunity, multiple occasions, every single opportunity to exist out there among folks that are largely peaceful, right? And when they are in error, I'm talking about the people doing the evil things. When they are in error, people are looking to justify it through social economic factors and other buzz terms that they use to basically say the reason why this person is acting the way that they are is everybody else's fault. People are sick of that. I belong sick of that. I despise that. And it's such an easy solution in the sense that, look, allow people to, whether it be integrate or segregate voluntarily, don't force them to do anything. And when you have folks that are in error, or they do something violent, I don't care if they are of whatever race, whatever demographic that they belong to, the crime is the crime. And especially when they've proven themselves to be that they are not going to abide by just basic private rules as it pertains to private property rights, and like, I don't know, not stealing from people, not hitting people, not being violent at people. They need to be, in the words of the great Hans Hermann Hoppe, physically removed and separated from the rest of society. That is the only way that geographical area is going to be largely maintained with some sort of peace. And that's a reality, okay? They shouldn't be living among other folks. Once they've proven that this is the case, now that's not to say that folks won't make mistakes along the way, and that's not to say that people won't change their line of thinking. But America's culture, unfortunately, has justified this type of bad behavior, and even worse in some cases, ignored it, acted like it didn't exist, and gaslight everybody else that has pointed this out and said and noted that this is a problem. The minute people, or the people that you, I guess, entrust with this sort of power to punish people, okay, start taking private property rights seriously, this issue will go away. Not criminalizing people for defending themselves and other people. That's, if you wonder why people stand idle and you look at them like, oh, they're cowards and stuff like that. Sure, there may be an aspect of that people are just selfish and all that. Okay, not to say that there aren't folks out there like that. But on the other hand, and I say this as someone who I'm always keeping this in mind, especially as a concealed carrier, right? Like, anything that I do, I have to process all this information. So if I'm out and someone's harming other people, I have to think about all these laws and all these different rules, and make sure that I don't do something, even if I save this person, right, or save the groups of people, I don't do something that ends up putting me in prison. There's so many stories that are like that. People that were defending themselves and their properties, and because the government deemed that it wasn't rightful or just for them to do that, well, they went to prison. Well, you have states that have duty to retreat laws, some of the most criminal laws in the books. If you don't know what a duty to retreat law is, it essentially says that you cannot shoot someone, right, and thus defend yourself and your property unless you're fleeing. And people go to prison over that stuff. Well, how much danger were you really in, right? Well, they were just coming to take the TV, as if you know that when they come and rob you or something like that. And you have to be leaving out of the back window, and they have to be attacking you in order for you to defend your persons, your family, the people around you, your house, your business. And this is a culture that, again, has been told that it is bad for wanting to defend themselves and other people. So that's why you have a lot of people that stand idle, because they process that information and say, well, it's not my problem. And if it becomes my problem, well, I risk, again, another act of self-preservation. I risk potentially being also incriminated in this, even though I know this is wrong. And sure, good men are necessary for any just society or culture to exist. Good men have been punished. And I think people are letting the government off way too easy by hyper-focusing on the racial aspect. And I'm not telling you to ignore it. I want to be clear. I don't want people to get this wrong idea. I'm not telling people to ignore it. You are very much in your right to acknowledge these demographics. You acknowledge the data, acknowledge what you've experienced. And that's why I say that in and of itself is harmless. People might feel some kind of way, and you're a cornball, dude, be it. Maybe that's not the language I should use, but I don't care. Like, if you are one of those types that, oh, well, people don't like to be around me, and they're the ones that are wrong. Like, that's the wrong way to go about living. Look, I'm not gonna lose any sleep if it's because I'm walking down the street and I got my hat on and my clothes aren't, like, I don't know, I'm wearing casual clothes, and people think that I might do something to them, so they walk across the street. I don't give a shit. I'm not going to lose sleep over any of that stuff, and you should not either, right? That's harmless. That is a harmless thing. Now, if that person was like, well, I'm going to go punch this person because I think he's going to do something to me, that's a different thing. And the violence is the problem there, not the fact or a reason as far as why he did it. There are savages and evil people that live among us, okay? You've seen it. I've seen it. We all have seen it. We know this. The fact that there are places within this country for that folks, you can't go peacefully just exist in because someone might do something to you, right? And then if you, let's say, any event, because this is what ends up happening, people have to justify this bad behavior instead of what you need to be focusing on, hyper-focusing on the fact this bad person does bad thing, and the people that are in charge have allowed this to happen. You focus so much on, well, why were they there in their first day? Why did they put themselves in that position? Like getting mad at the person that was the victim. And I'm not saying that that person necessarily smart for doing so, or they can't be gullible. You see where the problem is with that, though? And that's what we're focused on. Well, you know that's a bad area. And you know people act like this on the subway. You know that, therefore you should do this, this, and that. Not to say that you shouldn't, especially those of you with a family. This is something that you need to be explaining to your little boys and girls. How the world works. It is not this, you cannot be an idealist when it comes to this. That stuff will get you killed. You have to be a realist about the world. Still, the fact that the go-to is that, and not there are evil pieces of crap that live among us, and maybe we should get rid of them if they have proven themselves objectively to be bad people doing bad things to people. They should be physically removed from the rest of everybody else that wants to live in peace. Everybody's looking for justification. Again, I'm not saying anything. I know I'm rambling 15 minutes into this video. I'm not knocking anybody for feeling the way that they feel and acting accordingly. Again, especially those of you with families. What I don't want you to do is lose sight of how the people that are in charge, that you justified, the state, I'm using that in a more loose term, they know they can solve this problem. They know it's not that difficult. But you can't run on office or run in office on, or run for office, excuse me, once those issues get resolved. And I think that's why chaos exists the way that it does. And it's encouraged because there can always be someone that is going to make a lot of money, get very powerful by selling everybody a solution that they will never implement.